My dad said, "We all agreed you're not welcome at Christmas tea." I didn't cry. I texted back, "Okay, have fun." Then I canceled every autopay, the $2,750 mortgage, the utilities, the $7,000 holiday catering. By nightfall, my phone lit up fast with 42 missed calls. My dad's voice was flat, cold, and final. He said I wasn't welcome at Christmas this year, but the next notification on my phone made my entire world tilt. I woke before the sun that morning, the kind of gray Denver light that makes everything feel quiet and a little fragile. My apartment was still, the heat clicking softly in the vents. For a moment, I just sat there on the edge of the bed, hugging my knees, thinking it would be an ordinary day. Just another cold December morning for coffee, emails, and trying not to think too hard about the holidays. I was standing barefoot in my tiny kitchen, mug warming my hands, when everything shifted. It always surprises me how fast life can just tilt. I opened my laptop, expecting the usual flood of messages from my family in Colorado Springs. The group thread was normally buzzing this time of year. My sister Chloe arguing about recipes, my dad, Robert, barking instructions about arrival times, my mom, Eleanor, reminding everyone to label dishes. But that morning, the inbox stared back like a blank wall. No subject lines with Christmas. Not one decorating picture. Not even a passive-aggressive reminder from Chloe. I refreshed. Then again. Nothing. I tried the shared drive we always used for the holiday menu. Access denied. I clicked again, thinking I'd hit the wrong link. Access denied. That red message glowed, sharp and intentional. Something in my chest tightened, a feeling too familiar. I stood there, mug halfway to my mouth, my heart picking up pace. For years, I'd been the one quietly keeping that house running. Mortgage, utilities, internet, repairs, all paid from my account because I made good money, and because my parents had asked in that soft, guilt-soaked way that made it impossible to say no. Robert always said he'd handle Christmas and traditions, and I'd handle the boring things. He said it like a compliment. It never felt like one. I set my mug down and grabbed my phone, telling myself I was overthinking. Maybe a new thread. Maybe Robert forgot to add me. Maybe a glitch. The thought didn't comfort me, but I reached for my phone anyway. A new voicemail icon blinked at the top. Timestamped late the night before. I pressed play, holding the phone close. Robert's voice filled the kitchen. Cold, flat, the same tone he used when he wanted me to know he had the final say. He said they'd talked. They'd all agreed. I wasn't welcome at Christmas this year. No hesitation. No explanation. Just the verdict. I stood perfectly still. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe for a second. My shoulders braced, like my body knew this blow even before my mind caught up. A familiar ache crawled up my throat. I swallowed it hard. For a moment, I just stared out the kitchen window at the apartments across from mine. A woman in a big coat shook a rug over her railing, laughing at her dog. Ordinary life, simple and warm, carried on outside while mine seemed to tighten around me. I replayed the voicemail, quieter this time, like maybe the second listen would change the meaning. It didn't. It only made the memory sharper. The last Christmas they rushed back. I'd arrived late after a deployment at Nexus Corp went sideways. Robert had stood in front of everyone and asked if I'd finally decided to join the living. People laughed. They always did when he mocked someone. My face burned as I set down the food I'd made at dawn. Eleanor pretended not to notice. Chloe rolled her eyes and told me to relax. I pushed that memory down like always, but something was different this time. Instead of fading, it held its place. I walked to the table and sank into a chair, fingers curled around my phone until they ached. The tremble in my hands wasn't from fear, but from clarity. A quiet recognition washed over me. They didn't forget me. They didn't overlook me. They chose to exclude me. The voicemail was still open. My thumb hovered. I tapped save. The click felt final. I leaned back, head resting against the chair, staring at the ceiling. The room felt too still. I felt older than 32, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. But under that tiredness was something steady, something pushed down for years. A boundary was forming, one I didn't recognize but knew I needed. My phone buzzed. Not Robert, but my work calendar, a meeting in an hour. The ordinary world tugged at me. I set the phone face up. The voicemail icon still glowed, a reminder I wasn't ready to touch again. Outside, the sky shifted from gray to dull silver. I watched the light change, letting every thought settle, like snow on a quiet street. Slow, heavy, clear. I reached for my mug again, the coffee lukewarm, and took one long sip. My hand steadied, my breath evened out. And that's when the second notification slid across my screen, soft as a whisper, carrying a name I hadn't expected to hear from at all. For a second, my brain didn't understand. My eyes skimmed the preview before the words landed. A friendly reminder that your automatic payment of $2,750 for the Creekwood Estates property in Colorado Springs will process in 2 days. I just sat there staring at that little notification like it had arrived from another universe. Robert had just told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas, that they all agreed. And here was my bank app cheerfully reminding me I was about to pay for the roof over their heads. Something in me clicked into place. I set the mug down carefully and opened my laptop. The screen lit to my work email, but my hands moved straight to the banking tab. I logged in without thinking, the way muscle memory takes over. The dashboard came up, all blue, white and calm. Checking, savings, retirement. And then, sitting like a rock in the middle of a stream, the mortgage line. Creekwood Estates, Colorado Springs. Upcoming payment $2,750. My throat went dry. I opened the transaction history and scrolled. Month after month, same amount, same day, for almost 4 years. I did a quick calculation. The numbers stacked up until my chest tightened. It was more than most people make in a year. More than my parents had ever put into my future. I'd been sending that money out quietly while Robert held court at family dinners, talking about how hard he worked to provide. I clicked out and opened the spreadsheet I kept for myself, the one I'd started in my early 20s when I got serious about debt. Back then, I tracked every latte. In the last few years, the biggest entries were all the same: mortgage, utilities, internet, property tax, escrow. The sheet loaded, and my own notes glared back. I slid my finger along the touchpad, following numbers across row after row. Robert paid. Robert paid again. Electric bundle paid. Gas paid. I tagged most of them as family house. I stared at that label, my jaw clenching. There was a scanned link in one corner I hadn't opened in a long time. Loan documents. I clicked, waiting as the PDF came up. The black letters looked too sharp in the morning light. At the top, under property owner, it said Robert Miller and Eleanor Miller. My dad and my mom. Under that, in smaller type, borrower information, my dad and my mom. Then a second section, co-borrower. My name sat there in plain type, Sophia Miller. No mention of a co-owner. No mention of shared titles. I was a name the bank needed, not a person with any claim. I remembered the day Robert brought the papers to my apartment. I just started my new job in Denver, fresh off a promotion, still stunned I was making $350,000 a year. He sat at my small kitchen table, talking about opportunity, about family, about how this house in Colorado Springs would be part of our legacy. He said the bank needed my income for a better rate, and once things were stable, they'd add me to the deed. Eleanor had nodded along, eyes down, hands wrapped around a coffee mug. I'd wanted so badly to believe him. Looking at the document now, that memory felt like a scene from someone else's life. My stomach knotted. I kept scrolling through the fine print, hunting for something to prove I'd misunderstood. It wasn't there. I leaned back and rubbed my forehead. My breath felt too loud in the quiet kitchen. Outside, freeway traffic hummed faintly, like a low ocean. I thought about all the times Robert had introduced the house as something he built. The way he'd puff up when neighbors complimented the kitchen. He never mentioned that his daughter in Denver had quietly written most of the checks. I flipped back to the spreadsheet and added a new column at the end. I labeled it, with a small, bitter smile, reality. In that column, I started adding up what I had actually contributed. Mortgage totals, utility totals, renovation costs, the new washer when the old one flooded, the roof patch, the electrician bill when the wiring failed inspection. When I finished that rough tally, my head spun a little. More than 90%. That was the estimate staring back at me. Over 90% of the money that kept that house standing had come from me. While Robert told everyone he was carrying the family on his back. I sat there for a long minute, listening to the faint tick of the clock. A hot, little pulse of anger throbbed behind my eyes. Not the wild kind you yell with, the quiet kind that sits down and takes notes. On impulse, I opened my email and searched Creekwood Estates. A whole trail of messages lit up. Reminders from the bank, notices from utility companies, receipts from the home improvement store. When I ordered materials for the kitchen remodel, all addressed to me, none of them ever mentioned at family dinners. I clicked into an email from 2 years before, when I'd paid a huge plumbing bill. I'd written to Robert, explaining the cost, saying it was covered, but that we needed to talk about setting boundaries on how long I could keep doing this. His reply was short, almost dismissive. Something about how family helps each other, and with my big tech salary, it was the least I could do. I read it again now and felt that same old pinch. Only this time, it didn't make me feel small. It made me feel clear. I switched from email to messages and scrolled way back in the thread labeled family. 4 years, it had been where we shared pictures and updates. Somewhere along the line, it turned into a place where Robert lobbed instructions and Chloe tagged along. I kept scrolling until I hit a block of messages from around the time I signed the loan papers. I remembered Robert telling me he'd explain things to the family later. He had in his own way. There was a separate thread I hadn't paid attention to then, one he'd added me to after the fact. My fingers slowed when I saw the group name, Miller Core. I opened it and scrolled up. Lots of chat, mostly Robert complaining about bills and Chloe griping about her own life. Then my eyes landed on a small cluster of messages that made my stomach flip. Chloe wrote, "At least someone in this family is useful." Robert replied that Sophia should be grateful she could pay for something real instead of wasting money on her downtown apartment and silly gadgets. Chloe sent a laughing emoji and said, "Sophia always was a bit full of herself." Jacob answered, "As long as she keeps the money flowing, I can tolerate the attitude." I read that last line 3 times. It was one thing to feel used. It was another to see it, a transaction approved in a group chat. They weren't just leaning on me. They were measuring my value in dollars and commenting on it like it was a show. My hands started to tremble. I set the phone down, then picked it back up and took screenshots of the whole thread. Each soft click felt like a nail going into a piece of wood. I dropped the screenshots into a new folder on my desktop and named it with the first word that came to mind. Evidence. I sat there staring at that little folder icon, feeling a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for all the years I'd spent contorting myself to fit into their idea of family. Relief that I finally had proof I wasn't imagining it, that the slight twist in my gut every time Robert called asking for money had been my body warning me all along. The light in the kitchen shifted as morning wore on. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. I pushed the mug aside and looked back at the mortgage notification, still in my email inbox, 2 days until the next payment. For the first time since I signed those papers, a thought formed in my mind that felt both terrifying and solid. I didn't have to let it go through. That thought sat in my mind like a small, steady flame, while the rest of me felt cold. I closed the banking window and pushed the laptop away, but the idea stayed with me as I walked down the hall to grab a sweater. Every step felt heavier, as if my body already knew this was a turning point, even if my mind hadn't caught up. The sweater was draped over a chair near the window. When I picked it up, I noticed my reflection. I looked tired, not physically, but in that deep way that comes from years of being the peacemaker, the provider, the one who never said no. My eyes lingered, studying myself, wondering how I hadn't seen it sooner. I pulled the sweater on and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet as memories surfaced. Not the cozy ones, but the ones I'd tucked away. Moments that felt small at the time, but strung together made a pattern I could no longer ignore. I remember being 17, accepted into a summer tech program in Phoenix. So excited, I told Robert the second I got home. He barely looked up from the newspaper before telling me it was too far, and I shouldn't act like I was better than everyone else. I folded the acceptance letter into a tiny square and hid it. That program could have changed everything early on, but Robert made wanting more sound disrespectful. I remembered moving to Denver and landing my job at Nexus Corporation. I'd called him the night before my first day, hoping for some pride. He told me not to get a big head and reminded me that family came before career. Back then, I thought he meant it lovingly. Now, I heard the warning behind the words. Keep sending help. Keep paying. Don't forget what you owe us. I rubbed my palms on my jeans and walked back to the kitchen. The air felt different now. Clearer, like something had shifted in the room and in me. I opened the fridge for no reason, stared at the shelves, then closed it. My mind wouldn't stop replaying things I'd brushed aside for years. How Robert never shared financial details with anyone but expected me to pay bills with zero explanation. How Chloe sat at that shiny dining room table, smiling when neighbors praised the remodel as if she'd chosen the tiles I'd spent an entire Saturday picking out. How she told me in her soft, suggestive voice that my career was nice, but being supportive was better than being successful. The realization that all of it had been conditioning made my jaw tighten. I walked to the small desk in the living room and pulled out the stack of mail I'd ignored for a week. Right on top was another envelope from the mortgage company. They always mailed a physical copy, even though I'd gone paperless. The folded letter inside showed the same number as the notification, $2,750 due in 2 days. I laid it flat and stared until the numbers blurred. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Robert. The preview showed, "We need to talk about Christmas." My breath caught. I opened it with a thumb that felt heavier than it should. The message was short. "Since you are not coming, we need you to transfer the catering deposit by tonight. Chloe is handling the menu and said she sent you the total. It is $7,000. Do not be late." I let the phone drop onto the couch. No question mark, no greeting, no thank you. Just instructions, like I was an employee who'd missed a deadline. I rubbed the back of my neck and went to the window. The sky had gone pale and cold, the kind of light that promised rain. $7,000 for catering. For a Christmas dinner I apparently wasn't welcome at. I hadn't even seen the invoice, and they were already telling me to pay it. A part of me, the one that still remembered being a hopeful daughter, wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding. Maybe Chloe typed it wrong. But the larger part, the one that had spent all morning staring at paperwork that proved the truth, knew better. I picked up the phone and scrolled to the family thread. Right near the top was a message from Chloe, sent late the night before. "The menu is finalized. Sophia will cover the deposit. Dad said she promised." I had never promised anything. Heat rose in my chest. I typed a reply. "When did I promise that?" My finger hovered, but after a long breath I deleted it. I didn't know them explanations. I clicked the phone dark again. I walked back to the desk and sat down slowly. The mortgage letter lay in front of me like a question. For years, I'd answered that question with blind loyalty. Today, for the first time, I saw it clearly. I turned on my laptop and opened a blank document. My fingers hesitated for only a second before I started typing details I'd avoided confronting in full. Payments, dates, repairs, silent agreements, broken promises. I wrote down everything, as if preparing a file for someone else to read. But this file was for me. The more I typed, the more my breathing steadied. The facts were plain. I had carried the financial weight of a house I didn't live in and wasn't welcome in. I had paid for a family image Robert controlled, and a comfort they accepted without gratitude. I had allowed myself to believe that helping them meant I was needed, loved, included. But this morning showed me exactly what I was to them: a source, a resource, a dependable income line. And now they wanted more. $7,000 for catering on top of everything else. I sat back slowly, letting the truth settle without fighting it. A dull ache spread through my chest, but beneath it was something steadier. Resolve. I looked at the mortgage letter one more time. 2 days. That was all. I reached for my phone again with a strange calmness and opened the banking app. My thumb hovered over the autopay settings, not ready to touch anything yet, but no longer afraid of the possibility. For the first time in my life, the thought of saying no didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like air. I sat there, letting that feeling fill me until a different thought pulled me back. If I did this, truly did this, they would notice. And everything would change. The room felt quiet. Too quiet. I stared at the screen until a faint knock at my apartment door made me jump. I stood up slowly, unsure who would visit this early. I took a breath, studied myself, and moved toward the door. I reached for the handle and paused, hearing a familiar voice on the other side. It was my mom, Eleanor. I froze, hand still on the doorknob, breath caught high in my chest. I hadn't heard Eleanor's voice outside my apartment in years. She usually let Robert speak for both of them. And when she did reach out, it was by text, gentle and vague, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Hearing her softly say my name through the wood made my stomach twist. I pulled the door open slowly. She stood there, wrapped in a long wool coat, hair pulled back, eyes darting over my face as if bracing for something. She held a reusable grocery bag in one hand, like she needed an excuse to be here. "Hi, honey." Her voice was warm, but something about it felt practiced. "Can I come in for a second?" I stepped back without answering. She walked past me and set the bag on the kitchen counter. I watched her take in my apartment, her gaze landing on the open laptop and the stack of envelopes. There was no hiding the mortgage letter. Her eyes lingered on it a moment too long before she turned toward me with a small smile that looked like it weighed more than she did. I thought I'd stop by since I was in the area. She clasped her hands, the way she used to when she wanted to seem harmless. "I made you banana bread. I know you love it." I glanced at the grocery bag. Sure enough, a foil-wrapped loaf sat inside. My chest tightened. Growing up, banana bread was her peace offering. She always made it after Robert lost his temper, placing the warm loaf on the counter as if sweetness could replace an apology he never gave. I said nothing. She looked down at her hands and cleared her throat. "Your dad mentioned you were upset." The words came out slowly, carefully. "I wanted to hear from you about what happened. You know how he gets sometimes. He doesn't always choose the right words." A sharp, little laugh escaped me. "He told me I'm not welcome at Christmas. There's not really another way to phrase that." She winced, as if the sentence had been physically painful. "He didn't mean it like that. Christmas is stressful. Plans got complicated." Complicated. That was the word she used when Robert shouted at me for getting into a college he said was too far. It was the word she used when he refused to attend my graduation. It was always her way of turning harm into something small enough to swallow. I leaned against the counter and folded my arms. "Eleanor, did you know about the vote?" The words surprised me even as they came out. I hadn't meant to say them yet. Her eyes flicked up wide. "Vote? What vote?" I watched her carefully and saw it, that tiny flicker of panic. She knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough. The vote about whether I should come to Christmas. The one where everyone agreed I shouldn't be there. Her hands tightened. I wasn't part of that. I didn't agree to anything. "Your dad said some things were better decided without dragging everyone into discomfort. So he told you after the fact." She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. She tried again, her voice softening. "I came here because I wanted to talk about the catering deposit. He said you were confused about it." Anger flared. "Confused?" I repeated slowly, feeling the heat rise up my spine. "He told me to pay $7,000 for a dinner I'm not invited to. And you think I'm confused?" She shook her head quickly. "I'm not saying you have to pay. I just know Chloe has been stressed, and your dad doesn't want the holiday to fall apart. Not after everything this year. He thought maybe you could handle the deposit like you always do." Like I always do. There it was, the quiet expectation built over years. I wondered if she even heard herself. I pointed toward the stack of letters. "Eleanor, that house is in your name and Robert's name. Yet almost every bill in that pile is addressed to me. Do you know how much I've paid over the years? Do you know the amount?" She blinked at the letters, her expression tightening the way it did whenever she sensed danger but didn't know where to stand. "Honey, your dad said the house was a burden. He said you offered to help. We thought," she sighed, "we thought you understood." I pushed my hands into my pockets to keep them from shaking. "I offered to help in the short term. Not to fund your entire life in Colorado Springs. Not to pay every mortgage and repair bill. While Robert bragged to the neighbors about how he saved enough to retire early." She swallowed, guilt flickering. "Sophia, I didn't know the exact numbers." "Then ask." I gestured at the desk. "Look at them." She took a small, hesitant step forward. Instead, she looked back at me with a helpless expression. I used to feel sorry for her. Not now. Something inside me no longer softened for her excuses. "Honey, your dad isn't good with money," she whispered. "He's never been. He means well, but he gets overwhelmed. He leans on you because he trusts you. That's all." I stared at her, stunned by how easily she rebranded manipulation as trust. Eleanor, he told me I'm not welcome. He told the family I'm not coming, and then he told me to pay for everything anyway. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were shining. I'm sorry you heard it like that. I felt something inside me break, cleanly, like a stick snapped in two. I was done twisting myself into the version of a daughter Robert had built and Eleanor had helped maintain. No more minimizing. No more explaining. No more letting them rewrite the truth. I took a slow breath. Eleanor, did you come here because you care, or because he told you to talk me into paying? Her face crumpled for a second before she straightened. I came because I don't want the family divided. I came because if you refuse the deposit, your dad will explode, and I can't handle another holiday like last year. I came because Chloe is anxious, and your dad said you were being emotional. There it was. The truth, wrapped in soft words. She wanted me to keep the peace, so she didn't have to live with the fallout. I stepped back from her. I'm not paying. Not the catering, not the mortgage, not the utilities, not another cent. The words hung in the air like a door slamming shut. She stared at me, her lips parting in disbelief. Honey, please think about what that means. I already have. For the first time. She seemed genuinely afraid. Not for me, but for what Robert would do. She reached for the banana bread bag again, as if she could fix this with carbs and nostalgia. Please just talk to him before you make any decisions. I shook my head. There's nothing to talk about. He made his decision. Now I'm making mine. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she took a long, unsteady breath and stepped toward the door. If you stop the payments, the house will go dark, she said softly, like a warning she hoped I'd reconsider. Your dad will blame me. That was the moment I finally felt clarity settle into my bones. Maybe he should. She froze, hand on the doorknob, absorbing that. Then, with a small nod that looked more like surrender than understanding, she let herself out. The door clicked behind her. I stood alone in the quiet for several long seconds before walking back to the desk and pulling my laptop closer. My hand hovered over the autopay settings again. This time I wasn't shaking. I clicked into the account. Then I clicked the cancellation request. The screen asked me to confirm. I lifted my finger, ready to touch the button, when my phone lit up on the counter. Robert was calling. I drove to Colorado Springs without letting myself think too much. The highway was nearly empty, a long gray stretch cutting through the wet December morning. My hand stayed tight on the wheel. Every few minutes, I replayed the audio file Ava had sent, hearing my sister's voice drip with that familiar mix of mockery and certainty. They had no idea I had proof of any of it. They had no idea I was done pretending. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the clouds hung low and heavy. The house looked the same, the two-story blue home Robert had insisted on buying because he liked the idea of space, image, and status. The kind of house that needed constant repairs, constant money, constant attention. My money, as it turned out. I sat in the car for a long minute, watching the kitchen curtains shift. Someone was definitely moving inside. I could picture it already. Robert sitting at the breakfast table with his coffee, acting like he'd built this place with his bare hands. Eleanor moving quietly around him, always careful, always small. And Chloe probably sprawled across the couch, claiming she was tired, though she never worked a full week in her life. I opened the car door and stepped into the cold. The front porch creaked as I walked up. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Robert stood there in his faded flannel shirt, the one he always wore on weekends to look approachable, though I'd never known him to be anything close to gentle. He looked surprised for half a second. Then his expression hardened, like he remembered he was supposed to be offended by me. His voice was flat. What are you doing here? I kept my stare steady. I need to talk about some things. He leaned a shoulder against the frame, making no move to let me in. If this is about Christmas, Sophia, the decision has been made. Everyone agreed. We want a peaceful holiday. The words hung in the cold air. I felt something inside me twist. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything I already knew. My family didn't want peace. They wanted obedience. They wanted the version of me, who paid their bills and stayed quiet. I kept my tone even. I'm not here for the holiday. I'm here about the house. His face tightened just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but I knew him too well. It was the same look he gave when he was about to lie. I stepped forward. The mortgage, the utilities, the insurance. All of it. He lifted his chin. It's handled. Your mother and I have it under control. I almost laughed at the lie. The last 4 years of statements lived in a folder on my desktop. Every payment tracked. Every autopay receipt under my name. Every draft pulled from my account as if it were nothing. I took one more step until we were nearly eye to eye. Robert, you don't pay a single dollar into this house. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to speak. But I kept going. You have never paid the mortgage. You have never paid the electricity. You have never paid for the internet. You have never paid for the gas. You don't even know the name of the insurance company. Everything in this house runs on my income. Every bill has my name on it. His face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with anger. Watch your tone. I felt a calm settle over me. No. You watch yours. Behind him, I saw movement. Chloe appeared at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, her expression already smug. One look at her told me she'd heard enough to know I was supposed to be the problem today. She raised her chin. If you're here to pick a fight, you can leave. We don't need your drama. The irony hit me, so hard I almost smiled. The family that cut me out was accusing me of drama. I looked at Robert again. Did you tell them the truth? Did you tell them who keeps this house running? He glared at me like I'd insulted him in front of guests. It's not your place to lecture us. We've done plenty for you. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not tears, but fury held back for too long. You haven't helped me since I was 18. I have covered your late notices. I have covered your repairs. I have covered everything, so you could keep pretending to be the head of his family. He stepped in closer, lowering his voice into the tone that used to make me fold as a teenager. You're acting ungrateful. Ungrateful. The word hit me like a cold slap. I pulled in a breath. No, I'm done being quiet. I know what you said about me. I know what Chloe said. I know all of it. His eyes flicked just slightly. He knew exactly what I meant. Chloe moved closer and scoffed. You always twist things. You always think you're some martyr. None of us said anything that wasn't true. A wave of cold washed over me. So they weren't even denying it. I held my ground. I'm not here to reconcile. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to let you know that every autopay connected to this house has been canceled. The mortgage, the electricity, the gas, the internet, the insurance. All of it. You will be responsible for your own home starting today. Robert stared at me like he was trying to decide whether to shout or slam the door in my face. His voice finally came out low and sharp. You wouldn't dare. I met his eyes. I already did. Chloe's mouth fell slightly open, and for a moment she looked exactly like the spoiled girl she'd always been. What is wrong with you? I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. I stepped back from the door. I looked at Robert one last time. I don't owe you anything anymore. He took a step toward me, but I turned before he could finish whatever threat he had lined up. I walked down the steps with the cold air hitting my face, my heart beating in an unfamiliar rhythm. It wasn't fear. It was release. It was the first breath of a life that didn't orbit around a man who took and took and took. I reached my car and opened the door. My hands trembled just slightly, not from doubt, but from the adrenaline of finally saying the truth out loud. I sat behind the wheel and rested my forehead against my hands. When I finally looked up, the front door of the house was still open. Robert stood frozen in the doorway. Chloe hovered behind him. They looked smaller than I ever remembered. I started the engine. As I pulled away, my phone buzzed once in the passenger seat. A single text sliding across the screen from an unknown number. I glanced at it, and when I read the first 3 words, my stomach dropped. The text started with 3 words that made my stomach clench. Check your Facebook. It was from my cousin Ava. We were never especially close, but she was the quiet one at family gatherings, the one who watched more than she spoke. She didn't send messages lightly. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot a few blocks from my parents' street and put the car in park. My hands were still tight on the wheel. The screen lit my face in the dim gray of the afternoon as I opened her message. There was a longer note underneath. She said Robert had been all over the neighborhood Facebook group that morning, talking about the big holiday event at the house, about how he and Eleanor had opened their home and hearts to the community this year. Ava added that she was sorry and thought I deserved to see it for myself. She sent a screenshot. I tapped it with a thumb that felt heavier than it should. The image showed my parents' living room, the same room I grew up in, only it barely looked like the place I remembered. A huge Christmas tree reached almost to the ceiling, dripping with gold and red ornaments. The fireplace mantel was lined with greenery and white candles. Tables were pushed together with white tablecloths and place cards. In the center was Robert, standing with his arm around Eleanor, both smiling wide for the camera. Underneath the photo was his caption. He wrote about how blessed he was to finally host the kind of Christmas gathering his family deserved. How grateful he was that years of hard work had allowed him and Eleanor to create a warm, welcoming home for friends and neighbors. He talked about sacrifice. He talked about providing. I read his words twice, my vision blurring. There was no mention of me. No mention that the home he was parading in front of everyone had been paid for almost entirely by the daughter he had uninvited. The comments were a chorus of praise. People from the neighborhood wrote that my parents were a generous couple and that it was inspiring to see a dad who cared so deeply about his family. A few old co-workers of his chimed in, calling him a stand-up man. Someone even wrote that he had always been the kind of dad who went the extra mile. The bitter taste in my mouth was sharp enough to swallow. I scrolled further and saw that Eleanor had shared the same post to a local community group. Her added line said that after years of modest holidays, they were finally in a place where they could give back in a big way. My hands began to shake, and I set the phone on my lap. I knew Robert liked to look good to other people. I knew he cared more about what neighbors thought than what his own daughter felt. But seeing it in black and white, seeing him accept applause for sacrifices I had made in silence, hit something deep that I had pushed down for too long. I sat in that parked car as the December light began to fade, watching people on my screen call Robert generous and loving and steady. I thought about the bills on my desk back in Denver. I thought about the nights I stayed late at the office to get a bonus that immediately disappeared into this house in Colorado Springs. I thought about the voicemail where he told me I wasn't welcome. The word, generous, glowed under his photo like a bruise. I picked up the phone again and tapped out a reply to Ava. I thanked her and asked if there was anything else I should see. She wrote back almost immediately. She said there were whispers going around that Robert had promised some kind of charity angle to this Christmas dinner, that he had told a local church group he was hosting families who would otherwise be alone for the holidays, that a small neighborhood newsletter was planning to write a feature about his big heart. Something inside me went very still. I opened the Facebook app and searched for the neighborhood group. It wasn't public, but Ava had sent an invitation link. I clicked join, and within a minute, a notification popped up saying I had been approved. The group feed was full of the usual posts: lost dogs, porch pirates, someone complaining about fireworks. And then there it was again. My parents' house, Robert's name. The newsletter had posted a teaser. It said there would be a story in January about a local family who turned their home into a haven at Christmas. It mentioned my parents by name. It thanked them for opening their home and footing the bill. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. I could see Robert rehearsing lines in his head, planning how he would tell the story to cast himself as the hero. The hardworking man who gave everything up for his family. The dad who never stopped providing. The idea of him sitting in that living room, soaking in the admiration while knowing full well he had told me to stay away, made my hands curl into fists. After a while, I started the car and drove back to Denver, the highway lights blurring slightly as I blinked hard to keep them steady. The drive felt shorter this time, like my mind was already racing ahead of the miles. By the time I pulled into my apartment building garage, the sky had gone from gray to full dark. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet hum of cooling metal. My phone buzzed once more. Another message from Ava. She said Robert had started making comments at the party about finally being in a good financial place. He had joked that he used to worry about every bill, and now everything was under control. Someone had asked what changed. He told them he had been smart with money and planned well. I laughed once, a sharp, humorless sound that echoed in the small space of the car. Upstairs in my apartment, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I turned off my overhead lights and left only a lamp by the couch on. The soft pool of light made the room feel smaller and safer, like a circle I could stand inside. I opened my laptop on the coffee table and clicked into the evidence folder. Screenshots of bank statements, copies of utility shut-off confirmations, the loan documents with my name sitting in the corner as a co-borrower, the message threads where Chloe called me useful, the audio file Ava had sent, full of their careless words. And now, new screenshots of Robert's Facebook posts and the newsletter snippet. I organized them into subfolders: mortgage, utilities, conversations, public image. Every click felt deliberate, methodical, like I was building something solid, brick by brick. Part of me wondered if I was going too far, if collecting proof made me petty. Another part, the part that had watched Robert rewrite history in real time for years, knew exactly why I was doing it. He wasn't just taking my money. He was telling my story. He was erasing me from the narrative while still standing on everything I had given. I sat back and watched the cursor blink on the folder name evidence. It felt too small for what it represented. This was more than proof. This was a record of 4 years of my life poured into a house where I was no longer welcome. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ava. It was a coworker from Nexus Corp, someone in another department I barely saw outside of big all-hands meetings. He sent a link with a brief line that said he thought this might be my parents' place. The link opened to a local paper in El Paso County, a human interest piece preview. The headline teased a story about a retired couple hosting a community Christmas using their own savings to create a magical holiday for neighbors in need. Retired couple. Own savings. I stared at those words until they blurred. A slow, steady recognition settled in my chest. This wasn't a single disrespectful comment. This was a pattern. Robert didn't just expect my help. He expected my silence. He counted on it to build the reputation he wanted. Something shifted inside me as I closed the laptop. Until that point, canceling the autopays had felt like a way to protect myself. A line I drew so they couldn't keep draining me. Seeing that article, those posts, that praise, changed the shape of it. It wasn't just about stopping the money anymore. It was about letting the truth catch up to the version of him he had been selling to everyone else. I turned off the lamp and sat there in the dim room, listening to the heater click softly. In the dark, with only the faint glow from the street outside, a new thought took shape. He had spent years teaching people how to see him. Now, with every silent shutdown and every unpaid bill, the real picture would start to come into focus. I didn't know yet exactly how far I was willing to go. But I knew one thing. I was done helping him hold up a story that was never true. That thought stayed with me when I finally went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, and when I sat at my small kitchen table with a mug of coffee that went cold before I even drank half of it. The day after Christmas always felt strange to me, like the world was hung over from too much pretending. That morning, Denver was quiet. The street outside my window glistened with leftover rain, and the sky had that washed-out winter look that made everything feel a little unreal. My phone, which had been vibrating nonstop the night before, was finally still. For almost an hour I didn't touch it. I let myself move through small, normal things. I washed dishes. I folded laundry. I opened my work laptop and skimmed emails about year-end reports at Nexus. My brain only half-registering phrases about performance metrics and roadmaps. Eventually, the silence from Colorado Springs started to feel louder than the barrage had. I picked up my phone and thumbed through the notifications. A bunch of missed calls from the night before. Several from Robert, a cluster from Eleanor, a few from Chloe, one from a number I didn't recognize. Turned out to be the catering company, which I ignored. New overnight messages sat at the top. The first one was from Eleanor. She wrote that she hoped we could move past this, and that Robert had been under a lot of stress. She said she wished I hadn't chosen Christmas Eve to make such a big point. The second was from Chloe. No greeting, just a line telling me that I had ruined everything, and that everyone at the party now thought our family was a joke. The third made me sit up straighter. It was an email forwarded to me from Robert. Subject line reading in stiff capital letters. Legal consultation. I opened it. He had clearly copied me on something he had sent to a local attorney in Colorado Springs. In his note, he described me as an unstable daughter who had shut off the utilities out of spite. He claimed that I had no right to cancel the mortgage payment because the house was his. He asked for advice on whether he could sue me for damages to his reputation and for emotional distress. At the end of the forwarded message was a brief response from the attorney. It was polite but firm. The lawyer wrote that if every account was in my name, my choice to cancel them was within my rights. He added that any misrepresentation of who had been paying the mortgage could be a problem for Robert, not for me. The attorney recommended that Robert resolve the matter privately. I read that last line 3 times. Robert had not sent me a personal apology. He had not even written a separate note. He had just forwarded the exchange like a threat that had backfired. I took a slow breath, and for the first time since this started, I felt something new wrap around the anger. Validation. I forwarded the email to myself, dropped it into the evidence folder, and then stared at the screen for a long time. It was one thing to know in my gut that I was doing the right thing. It was another to see a legal professional confirm that I was not the one crossing lines. A little later that morning, my work phone buzzed. It was a coworker named Michael, one of the senior engineers who also did some consulting on contract issues for side projects. He didn't usually call me outside of work matters. I answered, keeping my voice neutral. He said he had seen the local article teaser that hinted at some drama in Colorado Springs and wondered if everything was all right. He told me in his calm, measured way that if I needed to run any legal questions past someone who knew contract law and finance, he had a friend who could help. I hesitated, then asked him a simple version of what was going on. I kept the details short. I said there was a house in my parents' name, a mortgage and utilities in mine, and that I had been paying everything for years. I said I had canceled those payments after being told I wasn't welcome. He was quiet for a moment, then asked if my name was on the deed. I said it was not. He asked whose names were on the mortgage and the utility accounts. I told him mine. He exhaled slowly. From a legal standpoint, he said that meant I held the risk and the power. I had been paying for an asset I did not own. He told me that stopping payments was not fraud. It was me refusing to continue subsidizing something that did not belong to me. His tone softened a little. If anything, he said, Robert may have opened himself up to scrutiny by letting you pay everything. Well, he presented the property as his achievement. What if he told any lenders or organizations something different? When we hung up, I felt steadier. The guilt Robert had always relied on was losing its grip. Around noon, a new text came in from Ava. She wrote that things in Colorado Springs were ugly. According to her, the party had completely fallen apart after the lights went out and the catering fell through. Some guests left early, others stayed, but talked in low voices in corners. A few people had asked directly who handled the bills. She said that in front of at least 3 neighbors, Robert had claimed there had been a banking error, that the mortgage company and the utility providers had made a mistake. One of the neighbors, whose brother worked for an energy company, had looked skeptical and asked follow-up questions. Ava finished her message by saying she was sorry but relieved. She said that for years she had watched Robert hold himself up as the hero of every story. She thought it was about time people saw behind the curtain. I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand, thinking about my younger self. The teenager who had believed that being quiet and helpful would one day earn real belonging. The college student who had skipped trips and shoes and dinners out so she could send money home. The young engineer who had signed loan documents because her dad told her they needed her just one more time. Every version of me had hoped that sacrifice would be noticed in more than whispers. Instead, Robert had chosen to pretend I was the problem the moment I stopped bending. That afternoon, while I was making tea, my email pinged again. This time, it was from a local reporter, the same one whose teaser link my coworker had sent me. She said she had received some anonymous documents regarding the Creekwood Estates property and wanted to verify a few things. My first instinct was to shut the laptop. The old voice in my head, the one that echoed Eleanor's, "Please keep the peace," begged me not to answer. But the new part of me, the woman who had sat in the dark the night before and decided she was done being erased, told me to at least hear the questions. I wrote back and asked what exactly she needed to know. Her reply was straightforward. She said she had seen public records listing my parents as the owners, but the documents she received showed years of mortgage and utility payments from an account under my name. She asked if it was accurate that I had been financially responsible for the house since the purchase. She said she would not print my name if I requested anonymity. She only wanted the story to reflect the truth about who had paid for what. I read her email twice, then 3 times. If I confirmed what she already suspected, Robert's carefully built image could crack in front of more than just a handful of neighbors. The small article about a generous retired couple might become something very different. My hand hovered above the keys as I weighed what to say. On one side was the familiar pull of loyalty, even to people who had not shown it back. Eleanor's face floated into my mind, tired and resigned, always smoothing over conflict. On the other side was the stack of proof in my folder. 4 years of transactions, 4 years of uncredited support, 4 years of being convenient until I said no. I answered simply. I confirmed that every loan payment, every utility bill, and every major repair had been paid from my account. I explained that my name was not on the deed, and that there had been an understanding I would be added later. That never happened. I did not call Robert names. I did not use words like narcissist or abuser, even if they flickered across my brain. I stuck to facts. At the end, I wrote that if she chose to share any of it, I did not want my full name in print. I was not interested in revenge headlines. I only wanted the record corrected. When I hit send, a strange quiet settled over the room. I made my tea and stood by the window while the water cooled. The street outside was busy now. People hauling boxes back into their apartments, taking down travel bags, walking dogs with sweaters. Life moved forward. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Robert. Not a call, a text. He wrote that he knew it had been me who canceled everything. He said that everyone now thought he was irresponsible. He told me that if I didn't fix this, he would never speak to me again. I stared at the last line for a long time. Never speak to me again. It was meant to sound like a punishment. For the first time in my life, it didn't scare me. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. In the end, I wrote nothing at all. I set the phone down and wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my laptop screen still glowing with the open email thread from the reporter. Whatever happened next, the story was not his alone anymore. And while I stood there watching steam curl into the air, a new notification slid quietly into my inbox, carrying a subject line that made my heart thump once hard. It was from the bank. The subject line mentioned the Creekwood Estates mortgage in that formal, careful way banks always use. My stomach tightened, but I clicked it open before I could talk myself out of it. The email said they had noticed the most recent payment had not gone through, and that as a co-borrower I was still listed as financially responsible. They invited me to schedule an appointment with a loan officer to discuss options and to review the account. I read it twice, then pushed the laptop back an inch and stared at the wall. 4 years, those notices had been background noise. I never let a payment slip, never gave the system a chance to notice anything. Now the machine had finally realized there was a human at the other end of those automatic drafts. I took a slow breath and picked up my phone. Before I could change my mind, I called the number in the email. The automated menu felt endless, but eventually I reached a real person, a woman with a calm voice who introduced herself as a mortgage specialist at the downtown Colorado Springs branch. She said she could meet with me in person if I was willing to come in. The old version of me would have apologized for bothering her during a busy week. This version just said yes and wrote down the time she offered. 2 days later, I drove back down the interstate, the sky low and pale, the trees along the highway bare and slick with leftover rain. The bank was in one of those newer buildings with too much glass and a parking lot full of trucks that looked more expensive than most people's houses. Inside, the air smelled like printer toner and coffee, and a television in the corner rolled through financial tips no one was really watching. A young teller led me to a glass-walled office where a woman in her 50s stood to greet me. She had silver at her temples and a firm handshake that made me like her instantly. I shook her hand and sat down, clutching the folder I had brought like it was a shield. Sarah pulled up the loan account on her screen and studied it for a moment, then turned back to me with a thoughtful look. "You are listed here as co-borrower," she said slowly, "and your parents are the sole owners on the deed. Is that correct?" I nodded. Yes. I signed so they could qualify. All the payments have been drafted from my account since the beginning. She tapped something on her keyboard. "I see that. Every payment for the past 4 years has come from an account in your name. You have never missed one until now. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. That's right. She sat back and folded her hands. May I ask why you decided to stop? The truth felt heavy but simple. Because I was told I'm not welcome in the house I'm paying for. Because I was told they had all agreed I shouldn't come to Christmas. Because I have been carrying the entire financial burden for years, and they presented it as their sacrifice to everyone else. Her expression softened, but she didn't rush to fill the silence. That alone made me feel like I could keep talking. I laid the folder on her desk and opened it. Inside were printed copies of my bank statements, my pay stubs from Nexus showing my software engineer salary, the mortgage payment confirmations, and the utility bills with my name across the top. I showed her the loan document header with my parents listed as owners and my own name in the smaller type of co-borrower. Sarah skimmed each page carefully. She didn't look surprised, just tired in the way people do when they have seen too many unfair arrangements dressed up as family loyalty. From a lending perspective, she said, the bank sees you and your parents as jointly responsible for this debt. That means the loan impacts all of your credit. But in practice, based on this paperwork, you have been the only one truly paying. I nodded, my throat tight. She paused. You need to know that if no one makes the payments, the house can eventually go into default. That affects everyone on the note. I cannot sugarcoat that. I swallowed. I understand. But I also understand that I cannot keep pouring money into a house I don't own where I am not welcome. There has to be some way for me to step back. She tapped her pen against the desk once, then nodded slowly. There are a few options in situations like this. Sometimes one party refinances the loan solely into their name. Sometimes the property is sold and the mortgage is paid off that way. Sometimes the co-borrower petitions to be released, but that requires the other party to qualify on their own. She looked me in the eye. If Robert cannot qualify without you, the bank cannot force you to keep paying. We can only report what happens when payments stop. Her words landed with both weight and relief. The risk was real, but so was my right to stop being used. Sarah slid a form toward me. This is a formal notice that you are unwilling to continue making voluntary payments on behalf of the primary occupants, she said. It documents that you have expressed concern about the arrangement. It does not remove you from the loan today, but it creates a record that you did not quietly agree to keep doing this. I read the short statement. It was nothing dramatic, just a line that said, I no longer intend to act as the sole payer for the property. I signed it with a hand that barely wavered. She stamped it and scanned it into their system. The sound of the scanner felt final in a way I cannot explain. When she was done, she leaned back. I am not supposed to give personal advice, she said gently. But I am going to say something as a woman who has been doing this for a long time. You should not have to bankrupt your peace and your future for two adults who chose. I blinked hard and looked down at my hands. Thank you, I managed. She walked me to the lobby. As I passed the teller line, a man with gray hair and a navy sport coat walked in. He was on his phone, speaking loud enough for half the bank to hear. I recognized his profile before my brain even registered his voice. My dad, Robert. He hadn't seen me yet. He told whoever was on the line that he needed to speak to a manager immediately. He said there had been a mistake with his mortgage and that someone had frozen things behind his back. The word unfair came out of his mouth like he had just discovered it. Sarah glanced at me, then at him. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Do you want to go a different way? She asked quietly. For a moment I considered slipping out the side door. Then I thought about all the years of walking around his moods, his temper, his version of a story. I straightened my shoulders. No, I'm fine. Robert ended his call and turned toward the counter. His eyes landed on me and widened, then narrowed so fast it might have been funny in another life. He stared at me in that lobby, his face red above his scarf. What did you do? He said, voice low but hard. The bank called me. They said there's a note on the account. They said you came in. People in the lobby shifted, their attention flicking in our direction. I could feel Sarah standing just slightly behind me, a quiet presence. I kept my voice calm. I told them the truth, that I have been paying for everything, that I am not going to keep doing it. If you want the house, you can figure out how to pay for it, or you can sell it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further while his anger sharpened. You're making me look like a fool. I held his gaze. No, Robert, you did that on your own. His mouth opened, then closed. For once, he seemed at a loss for words. A woman in line pretended to look at her phone, but was clearly listening. A teller called the next customer, trying to keep the energy moving. For a strange, suspended moment, it felt like the whole bank was holding its breath. Robert tried again. "You're my daughter," he hissed. "Family does not turn on family." I felt something inside me harden into something clear. Family does not erase family either. His eyes flashed, and for a second, I thought he might raise his voice, might cause a scene big enough that security would have to escort him out. Instead, he straightened his jacket and looked around, suddenly aware of the audience. "This is not over," he muttered. He turned away sharply and marched toward another office, demanding again to speak to whoever was in charge. I watched him go, the way he puffed himself back up, trying to regain control before he even understood that it was slipping for good. Outside, the air smelled like cold and wet asphalt. I sat in my car for a while, hands on the steering wheel, watching people move in and out of the building. Behind the glass, Robert paced inside one of the offices like a caged animal. My phone buzzed where it sat in the cup holder. A new email notification popped up on the screen, the preview showing the first line. It was from the reporter. She wrote that the story had been updated and would run online that evening. I stared at the words. The gray Colorado Springs sky reflected faintly in the dark screen, and I realized this was the moment things were truly about to shift. Not just inside the bank system, but out in the world where Robert had spent years polishing his version of who he was. The gray Colorado Springs sky blurred behind the windshield as I sat there gripping my phone, staring at the email from the reporter. She wrote that the updated article would go live that evening with the corrected financial information, the documents I had sent, and the acknowledgement that the house's expenses had been carried by me alone. No sensational language, no dramatics, just facts that would cut deeper than any headline. I dropped the phone into the console and started the engine. The heater blew a thin wave of warm air as I pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the road. Traffic was light, the kind that made you notice every red light more than usual. I kept catching myself checking the rearview mirror, half expecting Robert's old truck to appear behind me. It never did. Back at my apartment, the air felt still, heavier than when I had left that morning. I hung my coat over the arm of a chair and set the folder on the kitchen counter. The silence was the kind that felt both calm and buzzing with something I couldn't quite name. I made tea just to give my hand something to do. The water rattled in the kettle, a sharp reminder that Robert was probably in the middle of unraveling every lie he had wrapped himself in for years. I wondered what he had said to the bank manager. Wondered if he had blamed me, or if he had tried to charm his way through it the way he always tried first. The tea was too hot, but I took a sip anyway. Then my phone lit up on the counter with a vibration that made me jump. One missed call. Robert. Then another and another. 3 calls in less than a minute. I turned the ringer off and watched the screen go dark. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. Another missed call. Then one more. 5 calls. Then 10. The calls kept stacking, the numbers rising as if someone held their finger on the redial button like a weapon. I walked into my living room, pacing slowly, each buzz slicing through the air like a nervous beat. I had seen Robert angry plenty of times in my life, but this felt different. This was him out of control, his mask slipping in real time. By the 12th missed call, I put the phone face down on the sofa. I didn't want to watch it anymore. I went to my bedroom and began folding laundry that didn't need folding. When that ended, I reorganized a drawer I had already cleaned last weekend, anything to keep my hand steady. After a while, I went back to the living room. The phone lay silent. Then it buzzed again, short and sharp. A voicemail. I let out a slow breath and pressed play. His voice cracked with anger. He said he had spoken to the bank and knew exactly what I had done. He said I had no right to embarrass him in front of anyone, especially people he worked with on community projects. He said he had given his whole life to this family, and now I was making him look irresponsible. I didn't react. My heart didn't drop. I just listened with an almost strange detachment, as if I were hearing someone else's dad ramble into someone else's voicemail. Then he said something that did hit me. "You owe me for everything I did for you." I paused the message. I owed him for what? For the stories he used to brag about in front of neighbors, like how he worked double shifts when I was little, even though I later learned it was Eleanor who covered most bills. For the truck he bragged about buying for himself, but had used my college money to put the down payment on. For the mortgage I had been secretly paying while he took credit for being a responsible homeowner. The phone buzzed again, another voicemail, followed by what looked like a text notification. I didn't open it. Instead, I sat on the sofa and pulled my knees up, staring at the ceiling while my mind drifted back to the last Christmas before all this happened. I remembered how he had stood at the head of the table, talking about the importance of unity and gratitude. I remembered the applause he got when he complimented the house. I remembered thinking that the warmth in the room never quite reached me. The phone buzzed again. A cascade of alerts lit up the screen. 10 more missed calls. The counter jumped like it was racing. 15. 20. By the time I stood up and walked closer, the number had reached 27. I pressed my palm to my forehead and let out a breath through my teeth. I knew that once the article went live, the calls would get worse. He would want answers, someone to blame, someone to yell at behind closed doors. But there was no version of me left who would let him do that. The phone buzzed again. 29. 30. It was building the same way storms build on the coast. Quiet at first, then fast, then all at once. I could feel something shifting, like the ground beneath an old house finally giving way after years of pressure. By 35 missed calls, I stepped onto my balcony. The evening sun was low, turning the sky a soft pink that made the air feel strangely calm. Despite everything, cars moved slowly down the street. Downstairs, someone walked their dog past the mailbox. My phone buzzed again in my hand. 41. I didn't answer. I didn't even bring it to my ear. I just held it loosely while the buzzing stopped and silence spread over the balcony like a blanket. Then the final vibration. 42 missed calls. I let my hand fall to my side and closed my eyes. The cool air brushed against my face. Somewhere below, a wind chime rang softly. The world kept moving, steady and indifferent. Inside, the phone lit up again. A new voicemail. I stood there for a moment, not ready to hear it yet, not ready to let his voice back into my head. Instead, I stepped back inside, shut the balcony door, and placed the phone on the coffee table. I walked to the kitchen sink, ran the water, and washed my hands slowly. The simple motion grounded me more than anything else that day. When I finally turned off the faucet, the apartment felt quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that hides dread, but the kind that waits. I dried my hands and leaned on the counter, staring at the phone across the room. A dim glow pulsed from the screen every few seconds. It felt like the moment before a fuse reached the fire. Something was coming next, and I knew it would change everything that followed. The glow on the phone kept pulsing across the darkened living room like a tiny heartbeat as I stood by the kitchen counter, hands still damp from the sink. My apartment felt suspended between two moments, the one I had just lived in, and the one waiting on the other side of that voicemail. I crossed the room slowly, each step feeling heavier than it should have, and finally picked up the phone. I tapped play. My dad's voice filled the room, ragged and raw. He sounded cornered, like an animal trying to find a way out. He said he had spoken to the bank manager, and that they told him the loan was now under review because of my statement. He said the article was out, and people were already messaging him. He said the neighbors were talking. He said somebody at the fire hall had forwarded the link to the group chat. He said I had humiliated him in the worst way. Then his tone shifted, trying to soften, trying to claw back control. He said he had always done his best. He said I misunderstood him. He said this was all a big mistake that we could fix quietly if I would just call him back. I let the message play until his voice faded into static. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the wall while the house settled around me, small creaks in the ceiling and the distant hum of a car rolling through the parking lot. It struck me that this was the first time in years I had heard him sound unsure. The first time I had heard anything close to fear in his voice. I sat the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the street lights glowed against the pavement, and a neighbor walked her dog through the cold night air. Life was still happening, normal and steady, while mine had shifted in one breath. When I turned back toward the room, something inside me felt clearer. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just certain. I picked up the phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for the El Paso County civil clerk. A voice answered on the second ring, a young man who sounded new to the job. I asked a few questions about property disputes, co-borrower liabilities, and the steps for formally documenting financial contributions toward a house not legally mine. He told me everything simply. I took notes, thanked him, and ended the call. Then I sat at my dining table and opened my laptop. The light from the screen washed across the room as I created a document titled Financial Record Summary. I listed every dollar I had put into that house, every month of utilities, every repair, every bill, every late night I had stayed awake transferring money I should have spent on myself. The total looked unreal, like it belonged to someone else's life. The apartment stayed quiet while I gathered everything into a clean folder on my computer. When I closed the laptop, the weight that had been living in my chest for years finally shifted. I stood up, walked to the entryway, and slipped my shoes back on. The night air felt crisp when I stepped outside. I walked down the stairs and across the parking lot to the mailbox that sat under a dim light. My breath rose in small clouds as I reached for the metal handle. Inside was a single envelope. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Robert's letters were sharp and angled, like he etched each line instead of writing it. I held the envelope for a moment, my thumb brushing the corner. Then I opened it. The letter inside was short. He wrote that I had gone too far. He wrote that I had embarrassed him in front of people who had known him his whole life. He wrote that the family should keep things inside the house. He wrote that he hoped I understood the damage I had done. He did not write anything about the damage he had done. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. I did not tear it. I did not throw it away. I simply carried it back to my apartment and placed it in the same drawer where I kept documents from my old life. That drawer used to hold weight. Now it felt like nothing more than paper. The next morning, the sunlight cut across my bedroom floor in thin golden lines. I made coffee slowly, savoring the warmth rising from the mug, letting my breath settle. My phone buzzed on the counter, but this time it was a text from someone else. It was the reporter. She wrote that the article was live, and that she had updated it again with a brief editor's note clarifying the financial records. She said the response was already strong. She wrote that she appreciated my willingness to tell the truth, even when it was difficult. I thanked her and closed the message. For the first time, I felt like the story was no longer twisting in someone else's hands. It was standing on its own. Later that afternoon, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my cousin Olivia stood there with her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. She looked nervous in a way I had never seen before. She told me she had read the article. She said she had not known the full truth, and that the family group chat was an absolute disaster. She said Robert was yelling at everyone and accusing them of betraying him. She said Eleanor had been crying about the embarrassment, and that my brother Noah was furious that the truth was out. I listened quietly. When she finished, she looked at me with something like regret. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not seeing it sooner." For once, I didn't shrug it off. I just nodded. We talked for a few minutes at my door. She said she didn't expect forgiveness and wasn't asking for anything. She just wanted to acknowledge the damage. When she left, my apartment felt warm again, like the air had shifted just slightly. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked out to the little trail behind my building. The trees rustled softly above me. A creek ran thin and icy along the edge of the path. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, breathing in the cold, letting it settle inside me, the way truth finally had. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who tried for approval, who paid for peace, who bent herself into shapes just to fit the outline of someone else's expectations. Then I thought about the woman I am now, the woman who had chosen her own life, the woman who had finally stepped out of the storm. When I returned to my apartment, the living room felt brighter. The silence felt like a friend. The weight was gone. I sat down on the sofa and let myself breathe fully for the first time in a long time. And if you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. What would you have done when your own family put a price tag on your worth?